Start recording. So it should be recording now. Very well. So
Sounds good.
hello there. Thank you for
Hi,
joining me.
Prot. Thanks for
Uh,
having me.
let's start with some basics, like what is your
Sure.
name? Where are you? Where do we find you? And what do you do in
Yeah,
general?
so yeah, sounds good. So my name is Eric. I'm from the United States. I'm currently living in Ohio. I work as a software engineer for the Air Force Research Lab. They're
Hmm.
basically, the United States Air Force has a ton of research and development technology projects. I work on one of them.
Hmm.
I grew up in Minnesota my whole life, though, the land of 10,000 lakes. So
Ah,
that's where I'm actually traveling to today to go visit my family, and hopefully eventually just moving back to Minnesota, kind of ASAP, because we can get into this later. But as
yes.
cool as some things about my job are here, I'm definitely interested in moving
Hmm.
back closer to my family. But to
Okay.
continue, I basically, in addition to doing software development, I'm also really into like doing music and everything, and I, publish recordings on my website, which you can find at emfred.com. That's just emfred.com.
I will
I
also
post.
link to it in the description. Just yeah,
Oh, perfect. I appreciate that.
yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah.
I post a bunch of my music there. It's like
Hmm.
it's a lot of piano stuff. It's also a lot of like electronic music, sort of experimental music. And then I also post like some articles there on programming and sort of on everything else, book reviews, things like that.
Very
So
well,
yeah,
very
that's kind
well.
of what I do. I'm into software development,
Hmm.
into Emacs, of course, which is how I originally found your work,
Hmm.
and then
Hmm.
also just into just sort of like art and music and philosophy in general.
Oh, very well. Lots to talk about then.
Yeah,
But let's
yeah,
start with
exactly.
Emacs because now I'm
Yeah, sure.
interested also in the intersection between Emacs and your work, if there is any. So you are a developer, you use
Yeah,
Emacs. Do you use
exactly.
Emacs for your work, or is it
Yeah.
something else you do on the side?
See, I use Emacs for my work. They make it difficult for me though because we basically use like due to all the like security at my job, we use all these like kind of older versions of like software, older versions of operating systems. So the Emacs that I can use at work, at home I have an up-to-date version, but at work I have to use Emacs like 26, I think. And
Oh,
so it
wow.
doesn't have a lot of the packages I was expecting. So it's been an
Mm.
interesting challenge because there are things that I expect to be built in. Like for example, I always use the command Control X XG to just refresh the buffer, read from disk.
Hmm.
That's actually not in the version of Emacs that I have at work. So I
Yeah,
have to
yeah,
like
yeah.
manually sort of like find these commands. And obviously like Modus themes, of course, is not built in. Like there's some key features missing, I feel like. But it's kind of almost taught me more about Emacs because I had to rebuild my configuration because we use offline machines, so I can't pull down my configuration from GitHub. So I had to sort of like reconfigure Emacs basically and sort of
Ooh.
use this out of date version.
Oh, yeah, that's rough. Um, of course, some of these commands, like revert buffer, I believe, Control X X G, I think would be revert buffer.
Right.
Some of these commands, probably you can either find them basically unchanged
Yeah.
in version
I can still
26
run it
or
through
implement.
Emacs.
Sorry?
Yeah, exactly. I can still that command. I think I just run it through like meta X. Like I just
Hmm.
basically run it directly. I think
Hmm.
the Control X XG like key cord or key binding was just like added as a convenience feature.
Yeah, I think that whole key map Control XX was added in 28, I think, or something thereabouts.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds right because when I press Control X X, that's the point at which it says like command not defined.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah,
Well, of
basically,
course you
so
could define it yourself, but then of course you have to do all that work.
exactly, which I don't mind doing, but also like yeah, it's just kind of
Hmm.
you kind of see some things missing. It gives you a perspective on like how um how like useful each Emacs like version upgrade is. Like there's actually a lot of stuff still being added, and that's what makes it really cool when you're using the most recent version. That's what I always when I'm rambling about sort of advertising Emacs to friends, I always say like it's been in development for so many years. Every feature you could need is there. The calculator has 3D graphing. The calendar has all this blah blah blah. It's like everything you could need is there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Though, of course, you now telling me about Emacs 26 still being a thing that a lot of people use
Yeah,
puts in perspective the package side of things. Because, of course,
yeah,
what is built into Emacs tends to be more conservative, but
hmm
people in the packaging side, including myself, will basically target a recent version. Like, I think
yeah,
many of my packages are minimum version 28 of Emacs, or maybe
yeah,
29. Many of them. And of course, I don't realize that I am excluding a lot of people. And so I would try to see if I can push that number down.
Yeah, that could be a thing to consider, but also in my specific case, since we use machines that are air gapped, they can only connect to an offline network
Hmm.
essentially. Can't download anything from the open internet just for security reasons.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
actually cannot download, in addition to having to use Emacs 26, I cannot download a single package. So
Okay,
that's
okay.
another thing that makes it interesting. Because if I want like Markdown mode or something, well, guess what? It's not there.
Yeah, yeah, of course, of course. I remember because I follow the mailing lists, and I
Mhm.
remember this point being brought up in favor of the view that Emacs should be all inclusive, like pull everything into Emacs and just have one
Interesting.
all inclusive distribution of Emacs that includes packages that you normally find in the community.
Hmm.
Whereas there is this other school of thought, which is like, no, 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 Emacs should just be lean and only provide the core, and then everything else is a package which you download.
Hmm. Intuitively, I'd say I prefer that second option
Mm-hmm.
because I generally, in a software context, I generally like keeping things minimal and
Mm-hmm.
then just kind of adding on bells and whistles as you need.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that like the way that Emacs packages and the way that Emacs is packaged in general has always worked perfectly for me, except for this like specific context where I can't, for security reasons, I like can't access the internet or whatever. But aside from that, it worked great. And on
Mm-hmm.
my home configuration, that's where I'm using like all the packages that make Emacs really truly worth it for me. Like Vertigo is a fantastic package. Orderless, Consult, F themes, of course, is fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So those are really my like key favorite Emacs packages.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
at work, it's been cool to see how useful Emacs still is, even if you remove all the like layers of shine that you've added through installing various packages and everything. Like the core of Emacs is incredibly solid, even
Yeah.
without any packages.
What about these improvements that have been done to the quality of life when it comes to development, such as LSP, lately Tree Sitter? Do you use any of these technologies?
Yeah, LSP I use a lot for sure, especially when dealing with any kind of like C, C++ type code.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I've had a little, like I've had issues here and there with like trying to get LSP to work with other language servers. Like I think I was having some problems with like the Haskell language server and things. Like it hasn't been perfect for me, but I'm not sure if that's on the side of the actual LSP package or might be just something that my
So you are
system
using
handles.
LSP mode or igloo? I guess this is happening at home, right? Because on the
Yes,
work
indeed.
machine, yeah, yeah,
That's absolutely correct. Yeah. So
yeah.
I've tried both actually. I tend to use LSP mode more just because I find it like slightly more convenient. I can't even remember exactly for which reason, but I've tried a lot of this stuff both with LSP and Egglot, and sometimes it just works right out of the box, works perfectly. Sometimes I have to like set like one option for some path for an executable, and sometimes I find that I just can't quite get it to work at all. But that's also part of the sort of attraction of like using Emacs is sometimes you have to get in there and like configure things and you'll learn something even if it's slightly inconvenient. So
Yeah, 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 of course. Well, I think the kind of person who is drawn to Emacs ultimately doesn't mind fiddling with a few command line flags. But of course, if you
yeah.
tell that to a person who would normally not be so inclined to use Emacs, will be like, what? Why should I ever think in terms of some LSP client command line flags?
Yeah. And like I feel like this is something obviously you'd know very well too. It's like I feel like after using Emacs for a while, your brain just gets like morphed into like the Emacs like ecosystem basically. And sometimes I realize how different it is. Like sometimes when I show my friends my configuration file, I show my programming friends like my init.el file on my like Emacs Lisp stuff. They're like, they always complain like Emacs Lisp is so ugly. Like I can't even look at this. And I'm like,
Yeah.
Emacs Lisp is beautiful. Like everything, like the indentation, the parentheses, I love the entire thing. But it's just funny how like originally, because I remember first seeing Emacs Lisp too, and I'm kind of like, what is this? I mean, I was in a better position too because I was already sort of interested in like Lisp and functional programming, just like common Lisp. So
Okay.
when I looked at Emacs Lisp, I was kind of like, I was already warmed up to it a little bit because I was already interested in like the language, from it has a big history in computer science theory and everything like
Yes,
that.
yes, yes, of course, of course. And also in AI, which is now the latest hotness, of course, in the tech world.
Yeah, funnily enough, yeah. I forget the name of the guy who invented Lisp. I used to know
McCarthy, I
his name,
believe. McCarthy.
Joseph McCarthy. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
so. Wait,
yeah.
no, Joseph McCarthy might have been the American
No, no,
correct
I don't think it's Joseph, but it's some McCarthy.
spelling.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Me, I don't
Yeah,
remember. Yeah.
Yeah, McCarthy, exactly. And yeah, but anyway, that was kind of in my, so I was a little bit more receptive to Emacs Lisp than I think many people are, but I was
Mm-hmm.
still confused about like set Q, for example. What does that even mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm used to programming languages where you're usually doing assignments with equals and things like that. You know, it's kind of weird when you see these other forms as they're called.
Yeah.
Um, but once you learn the language, it's a beautiful programming environment for sure.
I think setq is a great example actually, because you also mentioned that yeah, this is like the form. So of course, when you look at it, it's a function that takes arguments and does stuff.
Hmm.
So that's very nice. And the thing is, if setq was just set and then quote the variable,
Hmm.
I think from a didactic perspective, that would be more consistent with how you would call a function with a symbol as an argument.
Yeah.
Whereas now the Q part of setQ does a little bit of magic behind the scenes, quoting the
Yeah.
variable. And so,
Yeah.
of course, that would add to it. But to your point, it's basically all consistent, and the syntax is so minimal where once you wrap your head around it, it's like, yeah, of course, like how else should it be? I mean, why would you want to have equals here and then a colon there and then curly brackets there and whatever other? Like, just keep it simple.
Yeah. And that's one fantastic thing about Lisp is that it kind of, I've heard people joke that it has like no syntax at all because the parentheses, and like in Lisp the parentheses kind of just group things into like in a way such that the function or the form basically just kind of reads like the abstract syntax tree of that form, which is quite impressive. It's because it kind of feels like a high level language because you're not necessarily dealing with low level things too much.
Hmm.
But it actually is kind of almost from a programming languages perspective, it's kind of like the most low level language because it's literally just
Ah,
so close to what you would see in the actual parse tree, which is
interesting.
super impressive. So yeah, I think Lisp is a beautiful language, and I think once someone gets past the sort of like bizarre first sight of Lisp, like having never seen a programming language like this, I think
Hmm.
it's honestly really intuitive and convenient because everything's just a list. Like everyone, it's one of the most simple data structures in programming is a list, because it's just a flat. It's just like one thing after the other. And the idea in Lisp and in Emacs Lisp, the first item in a list is like essentially like the defining form, like either the function you're calling or the primary form, like if or cond or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's
Correct, correct.
really
Yeah,
readable and it really makes sense. And
yeah, yeah. I think there is. I think most people are conditioned to seeing code that is of the C type, Java type, JavaScript type, and so
yeah,
when they see all these parentheses, they have like an immediate reaction, which is really negative. But
yeah.
I think once you get past that awkward phase, things are fine. I think.
Yeah, yeah, completely agree. And I think it was a great choice, I think, for Emacs, and I think it was a very like from today's perspective, it's a very interesting choice. Like if you chose to write an editor and make the config language like some Lisp dialect instead of like Lua or whatever, people would be like, "Oh, why are you doing that?" But I
Hmm.
think I mean, obviously panned out super well for Emacs, but it also might have just come out of like the history of how Emacs was developed and like what was going on. I think Emacs was developed at MIT, and I think that's also where Lisp work was being done. So
Hmm.
maybe it was just a circumstantial thing.
Uh-huh. I think it was of course, now I'm fuzzy, but I remember reading about it. It was the MIT Artificial Intelligence Lab, something like
Yeah,
that, which of
yeah,
course had the legacy of the original Lisp. And of course, they were doing that kind of research. And from there comes Emacs and Richard Stallman and many other
yeah.
things.
Well, on the subject of Emacs, I just have to mention this, and I've sent you emails about this, so I don't want to sound like a broken record. But your F themes package is fantastic. It makes Emacs so comfortable for me. So I would encourage anyone watching this video. There's a package called EF-themes. It has like over 30 beautiful color schemes. Split between light and dark. So if you're looking for a new color scheme, if you're not satisfied with like Tango Dark or whatever you're using, please check out Prot's F themes package. It's fantastic.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. The thing with themes, me, of course, I develop a lot of themes, but I always
Mm,
am of the view that themes are a matter of personal preference. So, of course, I can tell you about so called objective measurements, such as color contrast and whatnot. But
Yeah.
ultimately, it comes down to the eye of the beholder. If you don't like it, there is no point in discussing it further. Just pick another theme. However, what I would say is that having a theme that you like, any theme, I
Hmm.
think helps in a subconscious way because it's more cozy. You are more comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I totally agree with that. And like just I feel like the finesse that's put into the color schemes is actually like kind of a synecdoche that I use whenever I'm describing to a friend, to a programming friend or whatever, like why they might want to consider checking out Emacs because I always show them like things about how one of my favorite things about Emacs is how the how you can use the completion interface and everything that you set up like across the entirety of Emacs in this really cohesive way to search to consult lines in a file or to search for an MX command or to do this or that. It just all integrates so beautifully. And like one of the things I show them to describe one of my favorite things about Emacs, which is sort of that polish and that attention to detail that really makes it so user friendly for me, is like I always pull up like Vertigo, which is, if you don't know, it's kind of like an MX replacement. It just gives this convenient little like big mini buffer basically. And I'll type in like some fragment of an MX command, like, list packages, but I'll type in like, li space pa space ck or whatever. And I'll show them like the way that my favorite thing about it is the way that each component of the order list match is highlighted in a different color, and
Hmm.
how the colors all kind of look good together, kind of like this painting behind me.
Yeah.
And I always show them like it's just this layer of finesse. It's this layer of subtlety that really makes Emacs a joy to use, like day in and day out.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, that's a really subtle point, but I think it speaks to the kind of work that I do with the themes, which is like
Hmm.
using color with intent.
Hmm.
Which is like, of course, you can just colorize everything and make them all stand out. But the thing
Hmm.
is, if you don't account for color harmonies, of which there are many varieties, but if you
Hmm.
don't have consistency, basically, it will be apparent to somebody who pays enough attention. So
Hmm.
if, for
Yeah.
example, those orderless colors you see in the mode line are
Hmm.
colors that are in high contrast to each other, and then the
Yeah.
rest of the theme is more of a gradient, let's say, then
Hmm.
those will stick out and it will be like, why are you doing this? Those should also be of a gradient type. So it's that
Yeah,
kind of
exactly.
consistency, thematic consistency across the various interfaces.
Yeah. I think it pans out beautifully. And one thing too on the subject of like subtlety is I've been noticing too. I've kind of been trying out the Doric themes, which new package, new package by you, new theming package with a more sort of subtle, um, more sort of like subtle demeanor. And I've been noticing how even in that package it's really cool how like some in places where instead of a different color being used, sometimes it's like a different like font attribute. Like maybe something will be italic when in an F theme it would have been colorized differently or something like that. So it's cool how many ways I'm interested in like with my website and everything, which I started developing like a couple of years ago. At this point, I'm always interested in like ways to make the cleanest visual presentation or kind of the best user interface.
Hmm.
And I find that like like you're saying, like it's all about those subtleties. It's like I feel like even if people aren't consciously noticing those subtleties, they're noticing them when they take in the view or when they take in the full page. And like
Yeah.
like 100 little things that are done well will just make something. It'll just make a night and day difference between something that's confusing versus something that feels easy to use.
Yeah, yeah. And one way to approximate this, to think about this, is when you are in a room, like let's say you would want your desk to be orderly and your desk is a mess. And
It's
you are
orderless.
asked, yeah, of course, it's orderly. And you are asked to work there and ignore the clutter. You will
Mhm.
not be able to work because the clutter will keep bothering you. Like it will be really hard for you. My point is that let's consider it your immediate environment. If it's not conducive to your work, it will keep bothering you. And of course, the greater the degree of discomfort, the more distracted you will be. And many times people are distracted on their computer and they cannot put a name to it. And it may be because their interfaces are not conducive to their work. Maybe they have too many
Mhm.
colors, too many icons, too many effects, or whatever. Like these
Yeah.
sorts of things. I think it's a part of the interface, like the point of connection between the user and the machine, so the interface, that people generally underestimate or simply disregard.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's another thing that I really like about Emacs is, when I open my text editor, and, in this case, Emacs, it's just like all I see is just the file and then, the mode line, which just has, some information I need, but it's not really taking up the whole screen. Like often, and I won't ramble too much about this because I've said too much on this topic, but like when I see people using like VS Code, for example, like the amount of things on the screen just like boggles my mind. Like it almost feels like the file is like a tiny window within the like screen, and I'm like, how is this possible?
Yeah, yeah, and with other IDEs as well. Like there is this big rectangle with all sorts of, like, there is a tree view and there is a terminal and there are things going on, and there is this tiny window there where you are supposed to do your editing. And I'm like,
Yeah,
what? Am I
exactly.
supposed to write code through a keyhole? What's the idea here?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I'm not saying those other features aren't useful. It's just like to me, it's like a little bit like what's going
Hmm. Yeah, I'm sure they
on.
are useful, but it's a matter of,
Mhm.
yeah, how you present them. Okay,
Mhm.
very good. So
Yeah,
we talked about Emacs. Now I am
yeah,
curious to know a little bit about, if you can say, of course, like work. Like you mentioned the Air Force. So what kind of work do they do there? Of course, not.
yeah,
Don't tell me the
yeah.
classified part.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, let me read out code line by line. No, I'm just kidding. So basically, I work on a project. I mean, there are so many like I'm technically a contractor, which basically means
Mm,
there's this there's this government contract which basically, defines like a certain like project and a certain amount of money I think that gets applied towards that project. So basically, if you're a contractor, as I am working on a contract, you can only be on the Air Force base where I work in person. Because it's kind of like a military base. I mean, it basically is a military base. There aren't like, I mean, it's mostly just contract. Like the military base section that I work on is mostly just technology people, I think. So it's not like anything crazy, but like it did like you kind of need a reason to be there. Like you basically can't get on base unless you have like
yeah,
you
yeah,
know
makes
your
sense.
your issued ID, which you need a contract number to sort of get on that. But basically, the project that I work on is the term we use is autonomy. It's basically creating code that enables um, like I forget the exact. We just call them vehicles mostly, but they could be like drones or planes or whatever to fly automatically, basically to like carry out
Ah,
missions and do stuff automatically. So you could think of it as like um, the kind of the way it breaks down is that drones and like equipment. I think this is standard, maybe even outside the Air Force. They usually come with an autopilot that's sort of implemented in hardware or firmware.
mm-hmm.
Which can do that. It's so security critical that it tends to be just like implemented right with the hardware. But then the other stuff, when you think about wanting to replace a human pilot with some kind of software situation, you could think of it as breaking down into two parts. You kind of need to replace their sort of arms and legs, so to speak, which is that's kind of what the autopilot does. It
Mm-hmm.
steers the vehicle according to some kind of direction. But then
Okay.
you also need to replace the pilot's brain, right? Like everything they know about the mission,
Oh.
everything they know about sort of how to navigate, where to go, things like that. And that's one of the pieces of direction, I guess, that our software contributes to. And we just
Oh.
write one of many projects that does this kind of thing, as far as I know. But yeah, it's basically vehicle autonomy is the term that we use for it. Basically, automatic flight, basically.
So, automatic flight, but also operational autonomy, but also operational awareness, maybe. Uh,
Yeah, there are a
yeah.
bunch of different things
Hmm.
surrounding that, and like so the project that we work on is kind of big, and like everyone kind of like works on their own tiny piece of the code base, and I think partially by design, like people aren't really too like contractors, developers aren't too like familiar with what's going on in like the rest of the
Yeah, of
code
course,
base.
naturally. Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's definitely stuff like that going on. The parts that I work on tend to be more like developer centric, I guess, in terms of like fixing, just like fixing small bugs, fixing compiler warnings, cleaning up code, writing documentation, type like things like that. But yeah, that's kind of some of the things that our project involves.
I see, I see. Can you tell us what the language they use is? Is it Rust?
It's I wish it were Rust. It'd be fantastic if it were Rust. We use C++.
I see. Okay, okay.
We use C++, which is not as comfy as Emacs Lisp. I will say that,
Mm-hmm.
but it's it's fine. It gets the job done.
I
Um,
see. I see. Okay, okay.
yeah, and it is performant. And the C++, it tends to be pretty well written at my job. Like it's not the most beautiful code I've ever seen, but it's not the worst either. Like
Mm.
it's manageable. I mean, the bigger problem with our project is a lack of documentation, but the code itself is mostly fine. Again, it's not like beautiful to work on. I was looking over the source code for Git the other day, the version of Git
Yes,
and
yes,
stuff,
yes. Of
just
course. That's
just
in
because I'm
C,
thinking
right?
about. Yes, that's in C.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking about some potential patches that I might want to send out to the mailing list. And I was reading the C code for Git, and I'm like, this is the most well-written C code I've ever seen. Like the code at my job is not at that level, but it's pretty decent, I would say. Like it works essentially.
Uh-huh. It's interesting. Now, of course, I want to connect the dots because we were
Yeah,
talking about themes earlier, and let's call it beauty, okay, and
aesthetics. Yeah.
aesthetics, exactly. And
Hmm.
now you mentioned the most beautiful code, not the most beautiful. So I'm curious, what
Hmm.
would constitute beauty or aesthetics in this case for you? Like,
Yeah.
what would you consider like beautiful, elegant code?
I think it's a really interesting question, and I think it connects to what I find beautiful in art as well, which is like sort of like elegance of design and like expression of like rich and useful like patterns, like the way that the sort of economy of the way that a certain pattern or a certain mode of expression is used, and the way that that is kind of like developed across the course of the artwork, or the way that, for
Mm-hmm.
example, that abstraction is exploited throughout the course of the source code. I
Mm-hmm.
think those things are kind of getting at a similar thing in terms of, I feel
Okay.
like when we share art with each other, we're really sharing a kind of understanding. The term I tend to use is patterns of consciousness. Like a piece of
Ah.
art will express certain patterns of consciousness that the artist sort of had in their mind, through which they organized and designed and implemented this artwork. And when we look at a piece of artwork and find it beautiful, I think that's our brain resonating with the patterns of consciousness expressed by that artwork and how they sort of connect with our mind. Because as humans going through life, we have to develop we have to keep workshopping these like consciousness structures or patterns of consciousness, whatever you call them, ways of being, ways of proceeding. And I feel like when you see an artwork which expresses freedom, or which expresses precision, or um, which expresses hopefulness, or which expresses sort of hyper awareness, or expresses a lot of
Mm-hmm.
imagination, like these are patterns of consciousness which I apply to life across the board. So I think that's one of the projects of like art at large. Is I think it's one way to think about art is it's humans continually workshopping new patterns of consciousness that they can use to approach the world in a richer way. And
Yeah, beautiful.
that's one thing that I love. That's one thing that I love about reading code too, because for me, it all sort of I try to make connections between everything. And when I see a piece of source code, it might on its surface it might seem dry, and it might seem like it has no relation to anything fun.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
especially with well-written code, if you look a bit deeper, like the way that this developer, the way that this human is expressing themselves to accomplish a task in this code, when they do that elegantly, that resonates with other things like paintings, for example, that are elegant. And like that's part of the project of continually learning and expressing, and then sort of getting better on an individual and as a societal level.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, I really like that way of seeing it. So there is a
Thank you.
certain grace to the consistency of the
Yeah.
way of approaching it, like the way of
Yeah.
writing the code or the way of expressing oneself through the medium of art.
Yeah, exactly. And in art, like people often talk about like setting up constraints for yourself in order to sort of limit your sort of like compress your skybox with the artwork, so that you're not thinking about so that you're only thinking about a certain number of options, so that then your
Mm-hmm.
creative mind can work intensely on sort of finding the richest way to actually like use those options. And the
Ah.
interesting thing about writing code is that the constraints come for free. Like usually when we're writing a piece of code, there are a ton of constraints. We have to write in a certain language, we have to accomplish a certain task basically. And so I think it's kind of interesting in that way too, because like as a musician, for example, I sometimes create arbitrary constraints for myself for a piece. Like I'll only use these. Like, what if I only use these types of chords? What if I only use these types of
Mm-hmm.
melodic patterns? What if I only use these types of sounds? And like, if you think of programming as art, like we come with all these predefined constraints that are sort of part of the problem description. And I feel
Hmm.
like that if you, the more you focus on those constraints, the more elegant your eventual solution will
Oh, this is
be.
deep because, of course, it goes really far. Um, Let me ask you the other way. So, what
Hmm.
happens if we try to have no constraints? So, if we are like, you know what, I will just do whatever I feel like.
Hmm.
Are we actually more free? Do we do whatever we feel like?
Well, I find that that would probably, and I've tried this many times, especially in the context of like music. I find that I can't avoid creating my own constraints, whether I want to or not.
Hmm.
Because ultimately, even if you're not consciously thinking of any quote unquote constraints, like the piece of music, let's say that you write, it can only have so many things in it. And if you're
Yeah.
creating a consistent piece of music, a piece of music that makes sense, there's only going to be a limited number of like themes and motifs which develop
Yes.
throughout that piece. So like whether or not I choose those at the beginning, like even if I try to not choose those at the beginning, I sort of can't get away from my compositional mind, like latching onto certain like patterns and certain motifs that I then keep mining for more gold, basically.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
there is interesting stuff that can happen if you go into more of a free improvisational environment, or if you try to create music that's sort of more chaotic and more sort of all over the place and more sort of has sort of more of a liquid form instead of being architected with clear motivic pillars.
Hmm.
And that's a really interesting world of music too that I've loved exploring. I really love avant-garde music,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
I think my personal creativity tend more towards um, sort of grasping hold of certain um, guiding principles for a given piece, and then just kind of following those through, almost whether I want to or not.
Yeah, yeah, I see. Of course, there is the basic fact that your prior actions condition your next actions. For example, if you think of a painting, if you draw a straight line, of course,
Yeah.
this can never be a circle, right? Now you have to do something
Hmm.
involving a straight line, assuming, of course,
Yeah.
you will draw some shape, right? So,
Yeah.
at the most simple level, of course, what you said. But then with improvisation, my
Hmm.
understanding, just listening, of course, I know nothing really about music.
Hmm.
Just
You
listening
know
to
more than you
jazz.
think. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, sure, sure. But I mean, the
No,
theory
go
or
ahead. Go ahead.
whatever.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, no, no, no. Fine. Just listening to jazz, for example,
Hmm.
I still discern pattern, I still discern structure, but maybe it's not of a baroque kind of sort. It's more of a
Hmm.
spontaneous structure. It's not like some
Yeah.
architect sat down and then drew the whole thing. It just emerged
Yeah.
in the flow of that musician's consciousness.
Yeah. Exactly. With jazz, it's such an interesting case because yeah, jazz sort of has its own like sort of world interior of like the harmony that tends to be used, the sort of melodic patterns which you tend to use when you're improvising over some certain harmonies. And jazz is built on the idea of a looping chord progression, going all the way back to Gershwin's "I Got Rhythm." And so
And
in
what is
jazz,
that?
when you
What
have
is that? Sorry, sorry. So a looping? Sorry, can you repeat that? What
yes,
was it?
so in jazz, so the way that when you play a jazz standard, the way that it works, basically a jazz song, the way that it works is there is a chord progression,
Hmm.
and it usually runs for like let's say 32 bars. So like you know, chords that's in like 8 measures each or something like that. And basically, the way it tends to work is you just kind of you just kind of repeat that chord progression like over and over again, just like ad infinitum
Hmm.
across the entire course of the tune. And the way it works, it kind of a little bit resonating with classical sonata form, is that at the beginning, the first time you play through the chord progression, you play the melody of the song. For example, if you were playing like Straight No Chaser by Thelonious Monk, the first time through that chord progression, which is kind of based on a blues but sort of has some little extra bells and whistles in it, the first time you play through the chord progression, you play like the main melody of the song.
Hmm.
And then the next time through the chord progression, the following times, is when you improvise and you solo over the chord progression.
Ah,
And
while
so the
sticking
chord,
to it, as it were.
yes,
Mm.
while sticking with the chord progression, improvising sort of inside of it, or in jazz too, we often talk about playing outside, which is about playing harmonies that intentionally clash with the chord progression. And then that's a tension and resolution idea, where then you'll play something that,
Ah.
for example, resonates more harmoniously with the next chord. But basically, the idea and how it tends to work in jazz is like each person gets their turn to hold the floor. So, like for example, as an ensemble, if you and I and someone else were playing in like a piano trio, for instance,
Hmm.
let's say I'm the pianist, you're the drummer, and then there's a bass player. We would go the first time through the tune, playing the melody. Maybe this is let's say we're in a quartet and there's a saxophone player. This will make it easier. The saxophone player and I, as the melodic instruments, would play the melody.
Hmm.
And then the next time through the tune, let's say the saxophone player would take a solo. And then they would go those entire 32 bars, the same length as the melody, or maybe multiple cycles of that, soloing, improvising. And usually the way you improvise is like kind of inspired by the melody, but it's like a kind of a different perspective on it. So
Okay.
as you're improvising, you can kind of reference the melody, but you're also doing your own thing. And that's part of the tension and resolution or chaos and order dynamic going on there. And then once the saxophone player finishes their solo, maybe now I'll start soloing. So now I'm on piano, I'm playing, these different improvised
Oh,
melodic lines. So you're trading. So the saxophone player had their time on the microphone. Now it's my turn. And then after I'm done soloing, let's say now that the bass player will take a solo, and that'll last. There's a joke in jazz that like the bass player's solo, like everyone talks over it because like it's sort of in the low register.
yeah, of
So
course.
it's hard to get the audience to pay attention to a bass solo, but shout out to bassists. All bass solos are fantastic. And then um, and then the last time through, maybe you as the drummer would take a solo and you do some kind of cool rhythmic thing as everyone else is
Just to say that when you move your laptop closer, it interferes with the with your microphone.
Oh,
So
sorry about that. Yeah, I'll try to
yeah,
keep it
so
down
I
for you.
didn't hear you in that last part. So you do the solo, and then you said something,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
lost you.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So I, as the pianist, would take a solo now after the saxophone player, and now we keep rotating around. So now the bass player, for example, would take a solo. And then after the bass player solos, then you as the drummer might solo.
Hmm.
And then a drum solo are always interesting because you can't really play melodic stuff. You just have to create interesting rhythms.
Hmm.
That's an entire another subject. But basically, yeah, the drummer usually solos last. And then the
Uh-huh.
drummer usually does some kind of like dramatic drum roll thing, and then they hit the cymbal or whatever, and then it goes back into playing the melody one more time. And then that's how
Hmm.
you finish the song. So, like sonata form in classical music, right? The theme is stated at the beginning.
Hmm.
Then you go through the development, in jazz, it's everyone soloing, developing the idea of the melody, and then you come back at the end to everyone
Uh-huh.
playing the melody again, and sort of, and again, it's a tension and resolution idea because at the beginning everyone starts off synced up playing the same thing. Then each person goes on their own adventure, and then at the end they come back to that melody again. But now, as the audience member, your perception of that melody is informed by all those adventures that you've just heard. So you sort of have
Hmm.
you have a refreshed perspective on that melody, and that's usually how the song would end.
Wonderful. What about the coordination of the ensemble or the quartet or whatever? Like, do you need to play together frequently, practice so that you develop, I don't know, like automation between us, like telepathy, let's call it, or you
Yeah,
just,
exactly.
or it just happens, like you can just play with anybody and you are always in sync.
It's both, which is the
Mm.
beautiful part. I mean,
Hmm.
sometimes when I mean, it depends on basically your level of musicianship and kind of how the ensemble chemistry is working out. Like the more you play with a certain ensemble, like the more connected, the more telepathic you'll be with them, the deeper you'll be able to go into digging into ideas with them because you can kind of intuit what's coming around the corner,
Yeah, yeah,
etc.
yeah.
But also, the cool thing about being a musician is that when you learn to improvise and sort of think on your feet and just develop ideas in the moment, you can really play with anyone. And that's one of my favorite things that I used to do when I was in college in Minnesota, which was I'd go to the student union, sit down at the piano and start playing. Or if there was someone else there and they were already playing, and if they were playing some kind of like classical piece, I would try to not interrupt them. But if they were playing, something improvisational, I'd always go up to them and say like, "Hey, your playing sounds really good. Is it okay if I sit down and improvise or jam with you, as we called it?" And
Ah.
we had the most
Sorry. So
incredible.
you would sit on the same piano? That would be the idea? And
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's one
oh.
cool thing about being a pianist is your instrument is so huge, which is also inconvenient because you can't take it anywhere. But your instrument is so big that you can actually sit there right shoulder to shoulder together. So I just had the craziest adventures just playing music with like people and like people at vary obviously in their level of skill. So it's also a cool challenge as a musician to if someone's sort of at more of a beginner level, trying to like support them and sort of guide them into it's like a child, right? Like someone who doesn't
Yeah, yeah,
know
yeah.
how to speak very well. You try to converse with them in a way that sort of teases out the most sophisticated level that they can currently produce and try to augment that. And then it's obviously super fun playing with an advanced musician too, because then you can create these dynamic ideas and in the moment stuff that it's virtually impossible to imagine just sitting by yourself. Like it's really such a cool experience. So that's one thing I love about improvising is it can go so deep in terms of the practice side of things, but also like the dynamic side of just like being able to interact and have like a conversation, a musical conversation with anyone. I think is so beautiful, and it's always such a positive experience.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Of course, for me, it's amazing because it shows that there is a part that you can do on your own, but then
Hmm.
when you are in concert with others, or this
Yes, exactly.
interpersonal experience is something that you cannot replicate on your own. Like you cannot just do the same thing on your own. So there is something
Yeah.
emergent there in that relationship.
Absolutely. And it's kind of the high that musicians chase a lot of the time. Like because improvising when you connect with someone and you're improvising with them and it's working and the music sounds really good, like it's just there's nothing like it because you're as a musician you're your own audience member kind of because you're hearing what's coming out of the instruments or you're enjoying this music just like the audience is. And that's part of what musicians talk about with like sort of getting out of your own head when you're playing, like not over focusing on like exactly the quality of how you sound, just kind of like listening as if you're kind of your own audience member. It's sort of like a mental diplopia where you're sort of like you're able to without judgment sort of like hear or maybe with some judgment if needed hear what you're playing, but also to be the one creating
Hmm.
those
Hmm.
ideas. But also like when that situation is working out and like often whenever I go to play at public pianos and I'm doing like a duet with someone, people always will like, or very often, some people will like gather around the piano to watch, which is really cool because usually when I play by myself, I mean, sometimes I'll have some audience members and things, but like it's not anything like when you play with someone else. And
I
it's not
see.
even about the quality, like actual exact quality of the music. It's just like people, I think it's so beautiful that like people are always like, when they see two musicians like collaborating in the moment, like that's super interesting. Like it feels more like a concert. People want to sort of gather around that. And I think that
Hmm.
resonates with just how we as humans love music and love to see people interact and participate in music. So it all just connects with that, and it's such a cool social pathway, and it's just really
It feels
something I
more
think.
inviting as well. Like when you see
Yeah,
somebody playing solo, maybe they just want to relax or whatever. They want to be in their own world or whatever. But when you see two people playing together, it's like inviting everybody to join them.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And like often too, as for example, I'm playing with someone, I'll often be like, even saying things to them like, oh, like I'm gonna try this, or like, or we're playing, playing over a C major seven now, or like, oh, that left hand, that pattern you just played sounded really cool. I love that. And like that, I feel like creates an even more open and conversational environment where people can just
Wonderful.
come and join on the fly.
Have you ever performed on the street, like a street artist style? Of course, with your instrument, maybe that's inconvenient. I don't know. But have you ever done
Yeah,
anything? Like, how is it? If yes.
I would love to do that one day. I mean, I've performed at many public pianos, and that kind of gives you a similar feeling because like there are so many passersby, like you're sort of really playing like almost out in the open. But I'd love to do, and I've seen videos on YouTube where someone will take like an upright piano and then they'll bring it out onto like the street in like some city, and like they'll get a really cool crowd, and like everyone's happy to participate with the piano and everything. I'd love to do something like that one day, but unfortunately, not only are there not many public pianos outside on the street, maybe for good reason, although
Yeah.
it'd be great if there were some. But also like people, I mean, it can be different. Like I've noticed that like building managers and stuff tend to be really protective of pianos. Like even if you're in like let's say you're in like a clothing store that they have a piano in. Sometimes people will be cool with you, but like sometimes even if I'm playing like the most beautiful music, like the manager will come up to me and just be like, "You need to leave." And like
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
it's always a little bit sad because I'm like, why aren't we, isn't music good? Like, why don't people want like, music is enhancing this. Like, I'm literally like doing this for free. You know what I mean? Like, I'm helping your business. But like, I understand. Like, people think that pianos are like, from a manager's perspective, a piano would just be something to be like protected. Like, it's just expensive
It's just
bells or this
an
type of pattern.
expensive
Yeah,
part of the decor, of
yeah,
course.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Um, so, do you write music on the computer? Like, how does that? Because I'm
Hmm.
always curious. I see sheets of music, but I'm like, okay,
Hmm.
what do you have a specialized program? How is this world even operate?
Yeah, so there are so many different ways to go about it. So when you see a sheet of music, that's usually written in what we call standard notation,
Okay.
which is basically a way of notating music that sort of conforms to a certain pattern. Like all classical music was basically written in standard notation, it basically, there are a few key principles of it. Like you have things like time signature, which defines like the amount of like rhythmic units per measure, and like what those like how small those rhythmic units are basically. So like for
Okay.
example, one of the most common time signatures is 4/4, and all that means is that there are 4 beats to a measure, and each of those beats is one quarter note. So it's like 4 times 1/4. There are
Mm-hmm.
four of a quarter note, as we call it, to a measure. And a quarter note is basically, it's all relative, so it can be sort of, it's all like relatively defined, so it can be confusing for a beginner. But a quarter note is basically the normal, like a normal pulse.
Okay.
Like
Okay.
you could think of like your heart beats,
Mm-hmm.
kind of beats in quarter notes. You could think of it like
Mm-hmm.
that. It's kind of like a standard pulse for a piece of music. And then an eighth note would be like twice as fast, and then a half note would be twice as slow. Yeah, that would be a little bit of a longer thing. So it's all defined relative to. So a quarter note's sort of the normal note value. And then
Okay.
you have a certain amount of those per measure, and then it's kind of a mathematical thing. Like if I wanted to write, some ascending phrase which goes, da 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 da, then I would just write, you have the sheet music, you have these like staff lines they're called, and I would just write, well, like one quarter note here. I'm trying to make sure I'm doing this like from your perspective, like
Yeah. Yeah.
one
Yeah.
quarter note here. It's like kind of like a like circle shaped thing with a stem, and then I would write one quarter note here, which means higher. So like da da, or I'm singing the
Ah.
intervals wrong. Musicians will be able to tell, but it's like one quarter note here, one quarter note here, one quarter note here, one quarter note here, and that would be an ascending melody of like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the measure line would be here, which means the end of this measure. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like a line break, you could think of it as. And then on
Mm-hmm.
the next line, you might have a continuing melody or something like that. So that's kind of how the text of music sort of works out. And when I
Mm-hmm.
was a kid, I used to write, when I was playing classical music and stuff, I used to write my compositions literally on paper, just writing standard
Oh.
notation.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started using, there are also like text editors for standard notation. They're often called, I forget exactly what they're called. There's a term for them, but like score editors or something like that. And
Okay.
so then I
Okay.
was kind of inputting these notes on the computer, and you can literally type on the keyboard like A, B, C, and it'll like put them in
And they are
order.
graphical, or is it like
It's graphical.
some plain text that compiles into whatever?
Well, what's cool is that once I started getting into programming and everything, I started using a tool called GNU LilyPond, which is
Okay.
a plain text encoding of standard notation that compiles beautifully to these like PDFs.
Oh,
So that's actually what
wonderful.
I started using eventually, but when I was a kid, I didn't know anything about that.
Then, of
Um,
course, the question is there an Emacs mode for it or something integrating
there
with
is.
org mode?
There's LilyPond mode, yeah, which I have it installed. I use it. Um, but now mostly what I do is working with audio directly, and this is an interesting paradigm shift when you think about
Sorry, what does that mean? Audio direct.
So basically, instead of kind of like what you were saying earlier, like now instead of working with music notation, I mostly just use DAWs or digital audio workstations, which are kind of like, instead of being, you could think of it as a text editor for audio. Like when you think of like an
Hmm.
audio file, it's literally the like audio data. It
So
sounds
it's
a
like a
particular.
waveform, you mean? You see
Yeah.
that? Mm.
So now a lot of the music I do is literally just manipulating waveforms themselves, because now
Hmm.
I'm interested in what is possible by manipulating and fracturing and combining in interesting ways the audio pieces themselves. It's I guess it's a more modern way of working, and
Hmm.
that's been kind of a new vista, which I've been having a lot of fun exploring.
And has it provided you with any new insights into music or art in general, or has it changed the way you think of these themes?
It has, and I think for me, the most beautiful realization that I've gotten out of exploring the musical landscape and the musical literature as widely as I could, and trying to work with music and especially work with audio in order to try to push it in all kinds of directions, hear it in all kinds of different ways, is that it's sort of enlightened me about how musical the world is, just ambient sounds in the world are.
Ah,
Like
yeah, of
that's, I
course,
feel
yeah.
like, my most beautiful realization, because when you're working, let's say you're recording, let's say you have your digital audio workstation, you have a little wave file which is like a sample, as we call it, of like one note on a piano. It just sounds like a particular pitch. It sounds very normal. You can apply all kinds of effects and manipulations to filter down that frequency spectrum in order to be, for example, if you roll off all the high end, you'll get something which sounds very kind of like almost distant and low, and very kind of
Hmm.
like almost sort of how would you describe it?
Subdued, maybe?
Yeah, very subdued to taking off the intensity. Versus if you do the other thing, you take off the low end and you get to only the high end, then you have something that sounds kind of shrill. It sounds kind of incomplete, but it also has this kind of ambient thing. Like you could combine a bunch of those together to create sort of this like haze of harmony, create
Uh-huh.
sort of this harmonic mist. So there are so many things you could do with like a spectral view of like these different sounds. And basically, like kind of what I'm getting to is that like when you look at the different like frequencies which sounds are composed of, you see that sounds which we think of as very musical are actually composed of a lot of what we would call noise. Like, for example,
Haha.
if you
Yeah.
think of a guitarist plucking a string, or even a hammer on a piano hitting the string, not only is there the pitch, the singable note, but there's also all the noise of like their thumb stroking the string, all the little like clacks
So
and the
that
little like
scratch, yeah.
thumping sound, the scratch kind of.
Ah.
Those things contribute to the musical experience, and they make a guitar sound like a guitar. They make a violin sound like a violin. And those noise elements, which we appreciate musically in sort of small doses, is actually its own entire world of audio experience, of aural experience, and of musical experience that can be explored sort of for itself. So, like, for example, often when I'm in the car, for example, listening to the road noise or the sound of the road as I'm driving, other cars driving by, random sounds, a siren going off in the distance. Often I'm like, I wish my brain was a microphone right now because like this sounds so beautiful. Like I wish I could record this. Like
Yeah.
the deeper you get into listening to music, the more you hear that sounds in nature. More obviously musical sounds like bird calls, but also the wind rustling in the trees,
Mm-hmm.
the sound of grass, the sound of a creature running over some grass. Like these noise elements are composed of the same alphabet, of the same frequency spectrum that the musical sounds that we love are. And I feel like the deeper you go into sound, the more your perspective opens onto like the potential musicality of like all the
Yeah.
incredibly diverse and rich sounds in the world. So like that's
And
kind
it's
of been a
always
big thing for
there.
me. It's always there, yeah. You
Yeah,
just have to
yeah.
listen.
It's immanent, the immanent musicality of the world.
Yeah, and it reminds me of a quote from the composer Igor Stravinsky, who said that he was talking about the importance of listening. And I think this is such an important thing in conversation too. It like it all connects. But he said that to be a musician, one has to listen. It's not enough to hear because the quote he said is a duck hears also. Like everyone is every creature with ears is hearing stuff. The difference between those creatures and a musician is that a musician listens deeply, and that's
Mm.
so important in conversation. I think it's important for just like being an effective like human in general. But like
Mm-hmm.
deep listening is one of the core guiding north stars of like being a musician, and
Yeah.
that's what working with audio has taught me even more than I knew it before.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. Of course, much of what you said, like if we abstract away the particularities of music and working with audio and instruments and
Hmm.
whatnot, we could apply it to conversation. We could apply it
Hmm.
to everyday human affairs. So, of
Yeah.
course, it's all integrated. Yeah. So, for sure. Yeah. Um, One comment to make on though is that
Hmm.
working with audio, so let's say the tools of the trade, have
Hmm.
also informed your understanding of the art, right?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly correct. And it's something I'm working towards even more because in terms of like the like acoustics, like the actual physics of how sound works, like that is
Mm.
something that musicians I respect talk a lot about. And like I know some kind of, I guess, like basic things about it, but I want to get even deeper into that side of things too, just like really understanding sound. Like sound is really one of my favorite like experiences out there. Like I really just want to understand it even deeper. So like yeah, and working with the tools exactly has whatever tool you're working with in the moment will present certain options to you that are just more convenient, or that are just like when options seem available to you, then your mind is like, well, what if I tried out this option? And then like for example, when I'm playing piano, I don't have the option to apply like filtering or distortion to the piano because it's just a physical instrument. But when I'm in my digital environment and I have all these effects available, I'm like, well, what if I tried this? What if I tried to break up this bass line and make it sound like a some kind of broken radio static or something? What would happen with that? What if I resampled that and then put it through some kind of granular synthesizer to make this like microtonal choral texture? Like what would happen if I did this? What would happen if I did that? And like those little explorations inform sort of like your they build up sort of your musical life experience to where you've just traveled so many like dream logic pathways that you never would have encountered if you were playing a physical instrument. So and what the most fascinating thing is that enhanced perspective informs the way that you play a physical instrument, because now you have sort of an enhanced musical mind. So that's the beautiful feedback loop of like traditional
Correct.
versus avant-garde tools.
Correct. But basically, the tools in this case open up more soundscapes. Like there are
Yeah,
more options. Oh,
yeah.
beautiful.
Soundscapes is exactly the soundscapes is a term that's used in ambient music a lot. So yeah, they're very
Okay, so
apropos. And can I just I feel like I'm talking a lot, but I'd like to mention just one more thing
yes,
on something
of
you
course.
said a
That's why
minute
we're here, so that you can talk.
ago. So I'm gonna relate my favorite quote about music. This is my favorite quote ever about music and
Hmm.
musicianship, and it again came from Stravinsky, legendary guy. But so when you said that the stuff I was talking about, abstracting the way abstracting away the particulars applies to life in general, um, the most beautiful thing for me is that it also goes the other way. The stuff from life in general
Hmm.
applies to your musicianship, and that's part of the journey of like developing and sort of like music as a lifestyle. And the
Hmm.
quote from Stravinsky is that he was being interviewed for some like journal or whatever, and they asked him like, can you describe what musical technique is? Like, what does that mean to you? Because as musicians, like we're always like talking about like, oh, technique this, technique that. So it was apropos even at the time, and like even back in the early 1900s, they're asking Stravinsky like, what is technique to you? And he said the most beautiful line. He said, technique is the entire person. So you're
Hmm. Hmm.
everything about how you approach life that defines your musical technique. And I feel like you can even sense this, like a musician that you really respect, like when you watch an interview with them, the way their patterns of consciousness, but by which they speak and even by which they just do things, is like it's just admirable. It's like and not that there's always a perfect harmony between a musician's work and like their person, but like your person as a person applies to your work, and like the more development that you do on a personal level, I feel like it opens up opportunities for so much more development on a musical level.
Yeah. And of course, that's to be expected. It's a continuum, of course.
Yeah.
Just to say on this, it's interesting. Like for example, in ancient Greek, you would have people who would study practical stuff, and then part of their education was music. And
Hmm.
you will hear about somebody like Achilles, so basically a warrior, like a killing machine, let's say, simplifying now. And
Yeah.
what is Achilles known for? Playing the lyre. And they're like, what? So, so you have this brute who actually plays the lyre? What is happening? Yeah, just to
Yeah.
say an aside there. Yeah, but that's beautiful.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful idea too. It also reminds me, I think samurais in the
Hmm.
old Japanese culture also had to study poetry and study, I think maybe music and like calligraphy.
Hmm.
At least like poetry and calligraphy, I think were two of the disciplines, like the noble disciplines. And I
Hmm.
think that's it's sort of I wonder if it's almost becoming a lost art nowadays with how like siloed and specialized it feels like people become. I feel like we're
Yeah.
missing that sort of like classical breadth of education, but I don't know.
But I think we will have to, or not we will have to, we will need to rediscover it, or we will be rediscovering it eventually. I think we cannot avoid it. We need it.
Hmm. And of course, the internet is the ultimate library of Babel. There's everything you could possibly want to explore is pretty much on there somewhere, and that's also been exciting as a musician. Just kind of like looking at like finding music that obviously I never would have found otherwise, just by like poking around in weird corners, and I feel like there's kind of a that kind of connects with how I feel about the sort of like the free software and like Emacs community, for example. Like it's kind of this like passionate cabal of people who are like interested in like a very specific way of interacting with their computer, and like there's kind of the same kind of like specialist mindset of like kind of going deeper and deeper into this like world of like you know sort of learning about something and then getting deeper into it and maybe even starting to contribute. Like I feel like that kind of it resonates with my musical experience as well, of like first like dipping my toes into something like some kind of electronic music, for example, and then reading discussions of people who are talking about and making that electronic music and being like, oh, I want to try this myself, and then making a piece of music and then sending it out to the community. It's kind of a similar kind of like life cycle there.
I think it's the same. Like part of my motivation for doing these videos, for example, is to
Hmm.
get to know the different types of Emacs user, and
Hmm.
it goes to that. Who is that? What is the technique? Well, it's the person.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I want to know as many of these techniques, as many of these people as possible.
Yeah.
Because it's like you have something specific, which is Emacs, but then you bring yourself to it, and now
Hmm.
you have a unique perspective and unique insights, and I'm curious to learn more about them.
Yeah. Exactly, and just a person's unique insights and the unique way they express themselves is apparent in the documentation they write. It's apparent in the kind of
Yeah, yeah.
packages that they might push out to Alpha, and that just creates this beautiful variety of experience that you're having when you use the software. So yeah, it really works out in a cohesive and really beautiful way.
Hmm. Let me spend the last few minutes
Hmm.
asking you about. Of course, I could talk for like 3 hours. This is very interesting, but I
Yeah,
have
yeah, it's
promised
been
to
great.
keep this to around an hour.
Sounds good to
um,
me.
tell me a little bit about Minnesota because you mentioned something about what was it, 100 lakes,
The land of thankfully much more than 100. The land of 10,000 lakes we call
10,000
it.
lakes. Wow, I haven't seen a lake around here
Lo-
since forever. I
yeah,
don't think
so
there
much.
exists.
Yeah, lakes are definitely one of my favorite natural features. I mean, Minnesota. So the way it kind of works out is that in Minnesota we have Lake Superior, which is in the United States we have the five Great Lakes, essentially just
Hmm.
these huge freshwater lakes. Superior is the biggest one by surface area. It's the biggest one I think by surface area in the world.
So is
Uh,
that west of New York State? Where is Lake Superior?
yes, so it's kind of on the like eastern edge of Minnesota. Like if you go to like northeast Minnesota, that's where like the lake is like sort of cutting into like the state basically.
Mm-hmm.
And Lake Superior, it's the I think it's the like I think it's the largest freshwater lake in the entire world by surface area. I think it's like third by volume, but it's this incredible lake. It just looks like an ocean. Like when you go to the lake, like it's kind of like there are all these like lake towns, like Duluth, for example, which are basically like ocean, like coastal towns, basically. Is
Yeah,
kind
of
of how we
course.
think of them in Minnesota. And up there you have the Superior National Forest, which is like all the beautifully preserved nature around Lake Superior. Some of the most beautiful stuff I've ever seen. Just incredible hiking experiences. It's like kind of world-class hiking trails up there. So like Minnesota has that
Speaks
kind
to
of
my heart.
natural beauty thing. Yeah, Minnesota has that like natural beauty, kind of like up in the north especially, and that's where it gets super cold in the winter. Like you'll see like temperatures like negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit, stuff like that. You'll get your historic snowfalls. It's crazy
Ooh.
stuff up there. But which I'm a big fan of. I mean, not so much the far below zero stuff, but I really like it when it's cold.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
anyway, going back to Minnesota, like there's a big like lake culture in terms of like, for example, one of the towns that I sort of like grew up close to is like the sort of lake by it is sort of like the main like feature of the town.
Hmm.
And like every like there's a huge culture of like, just going out on like a little boat or something and just going to like sail
Uh,
around the lake during the day and like I don't know, it's just such a beautiful like for me water is one of my most like inspiring like which is just like things in the world like I love water. I love the way it moves. I love the sound of water. It's a big
yeah.
influence in my creativity. And I feel like that maybe comes in part from just like growing up in Minnesota and having water be such like a cherished, like fresh water be like such a cherished and like respected thing in Minnesota. My dad, for instance, is really into like fly fishing and like fishing streams and everything. And like sometimes
Hmm.
Wisconsin has a lot of great territory for that too, as well as Minnesota. So like,
Hmm.
I just love that Minnesota. Again, it's the land of 10,000 lakes. Incredible lakes there. You can go canoeing, you can go swimming, you can do all sorts of stuff. But
Beautiful.
also just like the inspiration and the tranquility of water. I feel like sort of like, at least in my perspective, sort of like, um, it's this sort of like vibe that sort of like hangs over Minnesota, and I think it's one of like the coolest things about it's Minnesota definitely has my heart, and that's one of the reasons why.
Yeah, yeah, of course. And I can relate, of course, as a Greek. Of course, we have all these islands, a
Yeah,
very close connection to the sea element. And I can
yeah,
relate to everything you have described. Granted, of course, at sea, you will get tranquility, but you can also get storms and these tempests. Let me put it
hmm
differently. The sea is it's so beautiful because it can give you everything. It can give you
hmm
this tranquility, beauty, means of trade, communication
yeah,
with other people, cultures, etc. So it can give you everything and can enrich your life, but it can
hmm
also take away everything from you. It has that
yeah,
duality to it, and I'm like, oh, this is so beautiful. This is amazing.
yeah, and that reminds me of like I think some classic Greek mythology too, like Homer's Odyssey, for example.
Hmm.
involve stories like that where you see, for example, Odysseus's ship
Hmm.
getting wrecked to pieces by, I think there's a part in the Odyssey where like Poseidon or someone like calls down a storm, or I think it's Helios calls down a storm
Yeah,
on
now I don't remember the
his
exact
ship.
details, but yeah, of course
But yeah,
there are
the
these
danger
symbols. Yeah, of
the
course.
danger of the ocean. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
the ocean is an incredible metaphoric repository
yeah,
for
yeah.
so much.
And of course, Poseidon as a symbol as such, he is this very hyper masculine kind of man figure. Not all the
Hmm.
Greek gods are like that, so he is especially like
Mm,
that. Which, of course, if you think about it symbolically, like a very strong man can be someone that can protect you,
hmm.
can hunt effectively, can
Mm,
provide for everything, is a good warrior. All these things that for an ancient society would be really valuable. But of
hmm.
course, that same
Yeah,
man can also abuse you, can harm you, etc.
yeah.
Kind of like the sea, right?
It's the same pattern. Actually,
Yeah,
that raises a really interesting question, which is like how prevalent are those sort of like mythic figures of like the Greek gods and everything? Because obviously, like I learned about that as a kid. Like it's always, but it always was framed as kind of a thing from the distant past. Like,
yeah.
are those still like talked about and respected like in Greek culture today?
In a religious sense, no, but
Okay.
artistically, yes. Artistically,
Okay.
they are still relevant. Like you will find them in songs, for example, or in metaphors, or in football clubs, the names of football clubs, or whatever. Like in culture, they are still there, and in tourism as well.
Yeah.
So, for example, Cyprus, where I am, it's the island
Hmm.
of Aphrodite, so the
Oh, okay.
goddess of love, beauty, etc.
Hmm.
So yeah, it sells.
One my favorite god, I think he's also a god of the sea, is Proteus, the
Hmm.
shape-shifting guy, who he can become any kind of different like animal in the sea and everything, and like there's a fascinating thing with him. And one of my favorite books, which is Ulysses by James Joyce, has a chapter which is sort of like based on Proteus in terms of the way that it's written. It's sort of like a stream of consciousness, experimental literature kind of thing. But one cool thing about Proteus is he's a shapeshifter, and he can perceive the entire past, present, and future, as far as I know. Correct me if I'm wrong on this. But also, he doesn't like to divulge what he knows. Like he's a cryptic guy. Like he doesn't like revealing. So there's this crazy part in the Odyssey, and I think in the like part where like Telemachus ends up tracking down Proteus, and they have to like they're on the beach. They somehow catch him. He's transformed into a seal at that point, and they sort of like lunge onto him. And they hold him down, and he transforms into all this different stuff. He transforms into like a lion. I think he even transforms into like a fire at some point. Like he's shape shifting into all this different stuff. And then eventually they catch him to where he shapeshifts into like himself, I think. And then he's like they force him to divulge the secret of like where Odysseus is, maybe something like that, or where something is. But I've always really liked that like cryptic shape shifting because I feel like that captures part of the like quicksilver element of like trying to hold on to like how trying to hold on to an aesthetic idea or just trying to understand life in general, like the idea that like the beautiful idea that like the knowledge is out there, like it's swimming around somewhere, you just have to go
Hmm.
and capture it
Hmm.
and like fish for pearls in that way. Like I've always thought that's a beautiful symbolic idea.
Yeah, and it's also symbolic in the sense that whatever you capture, if you think about it creatively, it's in a sense specific to the moment. It's something that you have lived through, and if you try to put it in a time capsule, as it were, it will resist staying there. So it will
Yeah.
shapeshift, as it were, and
Yeah.
uh, remain
Hmm.
elusive.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, I
Yeah.
connected to it. I had this moment of inspiration, this moment of creativity, but I cannot have it on demand. It comes and goes, and it's
Yeah.
always like that.
It's always swimming away. And I think part of the elusive goal of capturing things like that is going back to Emacs, having a really solid workflow that you use to, for example, write down your ideas.
Yeah, yeah, of course. And then you try to stay close to the source of inspiration.
Hmm. While also allowing it to change. It's almost an emotional relationship that you have to it.
Hmm.
Like you have to be willing to obviously be invested, but not necessarily be over invested in one particular idea. Because if you try to, I've had experiences in music before where I'm kind of obsessed with carving out one particular vision of this piece of music, and sometimes that ends up just not working. I get stuck. I get quote unquote writer's block. To me, writer's block, at least in the context of music, is basically a consequence of an unwillingness to let your ideas develop and change with the moment.
Oh, very
So it's
nice,
always
very nice. So
living in the
basically,
moment
it's
is
the
always
byproduct of dogmatism gone wrong, like or
mhm.
dogmatism which you didn't realize.
Yeah, and it's a balance too because you have to be stubborn in a way, or else you won't push yourself to achieve something
Hmm.
worth pushing for. But also you have to be willing at the same time to let things communicate their direction to you and to sort of follow. So follow that fish that's swimming in another direction.
Very good, very good. I say we leave it there. I really like that. It's
Okay.
poetic as well.
Thank you very much. It's an
You're
amazing
welcome.
conversation. Almost, it feels it's crazy to be talking to you because like to me you're just like this person who's like just like doing all this incredible stuff, just like living in the mountains of Cyprus. Like it's so cool to like I know it sounds kind of a ridiculous idea, but like for me, like having always I think I saw someone in a comment of one of your other videos saying like or I think it was maybe in one of the Prot Asks things like saying like, oh, I've always taken a passive role in like interacting with the internet. It's
Yeah,
interesting to now take an
it's
active role. It's kind of paradoxical.
the previous video.
Yeah, exactly. So
So
like
Gino,
I'm kind of
yeah.
yeah. So if Gino, if you're watching this, I'm having the same experience, and I really thank you, Prot, for hosting the series. I think it's an incredible idea, and
You're
thanks for
welcome.
having me, of course.
And
Yeah,
I
it's a
learn a
pleasure.
lot. For me, it's amazing. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, perfect. Well, that's amazing, harmonious relationship, and a good note to end on.
Very well. So let's call it a day then. Thank you very much for
Awesome.
your time. So I will
Thank you so
terminate the
much.
video and then I will close the call rather and then terminate the video
Sounds
and
good.
then
So
publish
great
it.
to talk to you, Prot.
Likewise, likewise. So take care. Good luck with
Yes,
everything
take care.
and enjoy your 10,000 lakes. Oh my goodness.
Yes, it'll be a great time. I'm flying out. I'll be packing after I end this call, and then I'll be driving to the airport just like an hour after that. So it should
Very
be a great
well,
time.
very well. So
Yeah.
enjoy the trip.
Thank you very much. Wishing you all the best.
Thank you. Take care, Eric. Bye bye. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye bye.
So closing the video, folks. Where is OBS? Oh, here it is. Okay. So goodbye from my side, folks. Take care.